Hey y'all, welcome to Geeking Out, the podcast about all geeky aspects of software delivery, DevOps, observability, reliability, and everything in between. I'm your host, Adriana Villela, coming to you from Toronto, Canada. And geeking out with me today is Doug Ramirez. Welcome, Doug.
Hi, it's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. Where are you calling in from today, Doug?
I'm in Central Virginia. I live in a small town called Crozet. It's a French word. It was named after a guy who was an engineer and built or architected a tunnel through the Blue Ridge Mountains, which is right in my backyard here.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, small town. It's pretty cool. Come
That's
visit.
awesome. That's so awesome. And I'm excited because we're in the same time zone.
Yes, I know. Isn't that
It's
nice
funny.
for once?
I know, right? Like a lot of folks that I interact with, even for this podcast, are West Coast. I've had a
Yeah.
few in Europe, but yeah, so it's like, yay, some time zone.
Yeah, I'm constantly doing more and more these days, just doing time zone math because there's
Oh
just
yeah, right.
the proliferation of telecommunications.
Very true. Yeah, I even know now what my time zone is in GMT. I finally
Oh
learned.
wow, that's impressive.
Yes, I finally remember it now. Okay. Well, let us get started with the lightning round questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, first question. Are you a lefty or a righty?
I'm a righty.
All right. Do you prefer iPhone or Android?
iPhone. Yeah, we're definitely an Apple family here. So right, wrong, or indifferent, we're 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 in the iCloud.
I feel ya. Yeah. I think my daughter has never used a Windows machine. So
Oh, interesting. Yeah, my kids have, so they have Apple machines, laptops,
yeah.
but they also get issued machines from school that are Windows, and it's always
Oh yeah,
interesting
yeah,
when
yeah.
they're asking me for help. I'm like, "Where's the start button?"
I know, right? Yeah, yeah. I haven't touched a Windows machine in so long.
It's been a
At
long
my
time
daughter's
for
school, they
me.
give Chromebooks for all of high school that you can
Oh,
talk
interesting.
to.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. But my daughter refuses. She's like, no, I'll stick with my MacBook Air. I'm like,
yeah. I honestly, I don't think my kids even think about it like in terms of a preference. I think that they're accustomed to phones and tablets and laptops of being different varieties, so I think it's normalized for them.
yeah, yeah. It's funny, like when I was growing up, it was Windows or DOS. Like you can even
Hmm.
Linux was not a thing. You wanted Unix,
No.
you go go to a server room somewhere like
Right.
desktop Unix, right?
Yeah.
Or like one of those like Sun Spark stations, workstations that we used to
Yeah.
have in my school, my university,
Wow.
not high school, but university. Yeah, we had
Yeah.
Sun Spark stations.
I've worked on those before. I've actually written code on those.
My first foray into the world of Unix was like my first year university computers class, and like no one even I didn't even know there was like other operating systems besides Windows. And I go into the
Right. Right.
computer lab, I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
And I was staring blankly at the screen, and it was like I think the C shell prompt, so it was like a percent sign. I'm like, what do I do
Yeah.
with this? And
Yeah.
they're like, oh, just type Pine. You can see your email. I'm like, oh,
Oh my God, I forgot about Pine.
cool. Yeah.
Wow. My first professional experience with Unix was actually writing some code on a PDP-11 at General Electric. PDP-11 is like one of the old machines that was very popular at that time. Uh, but I mean, it was old when I was at GE, and
Uh-huh.
I just felt like I had reached this level of accomplishment in my computer career when I got given an account on the PDP-11,
Yeah,
and I could log in and throw a little C at the compiler or do something fun.
that's awesome. And now look where we are.
I
Cloud
know, it's
provisioning
so amazing.
infrastructure through code. Like what? Never
Yeah,
in my life.
it's I still actually do um, kind of get have these moments of awe and like giddiness, I guess, to a certain degree when I think about how cool it is now. Like the things that we
I
can
know, right?
do is just phenomenal compared to what it used to be.
It's mind blowing. Like,
It really is.
my dad is he turned 70 this year, and he learned how to program on punch cards,
Yeah.
and he's like evolved along with the technology. Like, for funsies, last year he decided to like learn Rust, and back in the day
Really.
he learned small talk, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he was like, object oriented programming is the bee's knees, and then a few years later, after like all the hype after Java, he's like, Java and object oriented programming is an anti pattern, like,
Yeah.
which I think is like, it's kind of interesting because I think like people who are more established in their careers might not remain so technical,
Yeah.
later in their careers. And he's like remained, I would say, ahead of me in terms of like
Yeah.
learning
Yeah.
programming languages in that sense. And it's like, it's kind of mind blowing to see. I kind of feel like I see the evolution of computers through him as I've
Wow.
grown up and stuff. So that's been
Yeah.
neat.
It's interesting to think about, like you mentioned OOP, and I was sharing this, these stories with some folks that I work with recently, and this idea of Gen AI, and
Mhm.
like what's going to happen. And I tend to lean back into my experiences, which have always been pretty positive when it's been, you know, as a professional developer, through Y2K. Like I remember,
Mhm.
how scary that was. They're different. They're different things, right? Gen AI and that, but just this idea of like object oriented programming, was a thing that came about, and it really did kind of catapult people's ability to deliver software solutions faster.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
remember when component based, like Visual Basic and
Mhm.
Delphi, some of these other
Yeah, yeah,
languages,
yeah.
tools that came out, right? Like it was this idea of like, well, developers are not going to have a job anymore because you just pull these things off of a palette and drop
Yeah.
them onto a canvas, and the software builds itself. And even things like rational rows, like you just draw circles and lines, and this thing will generate all this code for you. You don't need
Yeah, yeah, I
developers
remember
anymore.
that.
And I think Gen AI is different, right? Like I think it
Mhm.
is a different thing, but I do think that at the end of the day, what I think is going to happen, and what I hope is going to happen, is that it just is going to give us the ability to invite more people into this craft and develop solutions faster. Like I don't see it replacing developers. I think
No.
it might create the opportunity for more people to learn how to express sets of instructions through a language that a computer understands, right?
Yeah, 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 definitely. I see it like very much as an aid, right? Like, let it
Hmm.
take care of the stuff that, you know, isn't as interesting, and let's focus on the things that are more
Yeah.
interesting. Like, it kind of relieves a little bit of that mental burden. But I think it also makes me think back to a conversation that I had with somebody earlier on in the podcast, where they were saying, it was almost like a caution, because like I think they were saying that it's like very important to have that base knowledge as well, right? So that
Yeah.
you don't take it for granted, right? Rather than like, don't like rely on AI as a crutch. Like, still have those first principles fundamentals, and then it
Yeah.
can really like give you
Yeah.
those superpowers. Because I think that's
Yeah.
like the risk that we can potentially run, especially like kids who are growing up in an AI powered world, where they might not have that incentive to learn the fundamentals as a result.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is like one of the main challenges that we face, right? Like how do we, and just being responsible with it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, next question on our list. What is your favorite programming language?
I would say my favorite programming language right now is definitely Python. I I've I've been doing this for a long time. Like I started writing software when I was a little kid, as a matter of fact, in the late '70s, and my I was one of just a very unique opportunity or place to be, where I had two parents who were educators, and we had access to computers before most people didn't. although the computers were large, like
Yeah,
mainframes that were on the grounds of the University of Virginia, where my
that's so
dad
cool.
worked. Um, and so I've written it all. I really have written in so many different languages. I think it's like 30 different languages I've written code in. Um, and I've gone through these periods of my career when I've thought about software in the language that I was writing in. Like I
Yeah.
can think back to when I was at General Electric, I used to think about software in C.
Hmm.
And I would dream, and sometimes I still do dream about software and trying to express something in a language. Anyway, so it was C for a while, it was C++ for a while, Java, C sharp, some smattering of languages in between. But I definitely now am at the point where Python is my go-to. So if I ever want to do anything, you know, outside of work, let's say, if I just want to like write a script or I don't know, just have fun. Like I'm usually
Yeah.
pulling repos from GitHub that are written in Python, and
Yeah.
that's kind of the language that I prefer. Um, I'm still able to read code in a lot of other languages,
Yeah.
but I think that I'm at the point now where the half life on, let's say, my C++ experience is such that I would probably have to RTFM and take my time and
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
ask Copilot for some help.
I feel you. I feel you. I did Java programming for a really long time, and I found that if I was ever away from it for like a stretch, even if it was like a couple of months, it was always one of those cases of like, oh my god, I don't remember how to set up my
Yeah,
JVM or whatever, or how do I
yeah,
do this again? Like, how do I
yeah,
find the length of a string or whatever the hell? Like, how do for loops work
yeah. I know that's funny. Um,
again? You got
I
me
tried to
curious.
go
Sorry, go
ahead.
ahead. I was going to ask, like, you said you started working with computers like really at a really young age. What was your first programming language?
Um, I would say basic. Yeah,
Basic.
for sure.
Yes. Good
I
old
taught
basic.
myself basic when I was a kid. My dad had some books around, and back then the I guess the body of knowledge was just so small. Like the books were very very prescriptive. Like it
Yeah.
showed you
Yeah.
everything you needed to do.
Yeah.
Um, and they were dry. They weren't really about programming. It's just like let's build a
This is how you do
calculator, and
this.
there's like 10 pages of like all the things you have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and I learned a little bit of assembler. I taught myself a little bit of assembler when I was in middle school, um, just because I wanted to do. I don't know. I think my dad told me that assembler was like the language you really need to use if you want to do something with the hardware of the computer.
You're right. Right. Right.
And so I just remember getting to the point where like I could have a small bit of assembly code that would turn the screen blue or red, and I just thought that that was the coolest thing ever. And I was a little kid when I was doing that.
That is so cool. I think everyone who's learning how to code should learn assembler because it gives you an appreciation for memory allocation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think for me, it gave me an appreciation for garbage collectors when they first
Yes,
came
that's the
out
other thing.
because
Yeah.
I was definitely one of those people where it's like, there's no way I'm letting something else decide when memory's being
Hmm.
um, reclaimed. Like I'm not letting it do that. And then after a while, I remember thinking, this is actually kind of cool.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like I don't have to worry about allocating and deallocating memory anymore. It's like
Yeah,
brilliant.
yeah,
Again, it goes back to this idea that like I'm lucky that I have been able to been around and seen
yeah, yeah,
these incremental steps and the evolution of software, and like garbage collection was one of them. Like, man, now I
yeah,
can
yeah,
spend, I can get that 33% of my time back. Yeah, maybe for some people it might have been 50%. Some people might have
yeah,
been
yeah,
20%. But still, it's like I don't have to do that thing anymore, and I can still focus on my craft, and I can still solve the problems. Like this is a win
yeah,
for everybody.
yeah, yeah, yeah. In some ways, it kind of even ties to like the paradigm shift of like say the DevOps movement or like automation in general, right? Where we're
Yeah,
talking about like people are like so afraid, oh, this is going to take my job, and it's like, no, you get to focus on the cool shit now. Like
yeah,
this is where it's at, and it's the same
yeah,
sort of idea, but it's like but you still understand fundamentally how it works, which is really important. Like I remember like I learned C in university, and then it wasn't until I learned assembler for like a course in my fourth year where I'm like, oh, I
Yeah.
get it now. I wish I
Yeah.
learned assembler before I learned C, because I think I would have had a much better appreciation for all the things. And I think
Yeah.
like that's the type of thing that I feel like we still like, that's the kind of knowledge that we still need to impart on
Yeah.
folks in school, right?
Yeah. You know, it reminds me, I have on and off for the last few years, I've been trying to finish this book called Code by Charles Petzold, I want to say.
Hmm.
Um, and it explains the history of it basically says, okay, today we have computers that do this, right?
Yeah.
Let's go back into time, and he walks you through like the evolution of like languages and numbers and basic math, and eventually you get to the point where you start to understand how computers really work.
Right.
You know, like this idea of like, um, gates and relays and switches. Like you can, I mean, computers are physical, but like the idea that like you can build like a very, you
Yeah.
know, um, rudimentary thing that would show you how to make a decision, and you could like walk up to it and touch it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, like I don't know if everybody needs to know that level of detail, but I do appreciate it when, I'm talking to other engineers and they can, they can have that mental model. I don't know,
Yeah. Yeah.
just in a
Yeah. Yeah.
cosmic way, it lets you kind of bond.
Totally, totally. I love it. Okay, next question in our series is: do you prefer Dev or Ops?
Do I prefer dev or ops? I would say dev for sure. Um, Although I have lots of opinions about ops.
Please feel free to share.
I've
This is the
done a
place
lot of
for
it.
it.
It's interesting. Like I don't know what everybody's experience is like, but I feel like, when the ops movement came around, DevOps, I think some organizations got it right, and the ones that did like really achieved massive benefit from it.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
But in my experience, I feel like, it like leaning back again in my history, like the idea of a DBA, right? Like
Hmm.
the DBA is the DBA is ostensibly there to help you go faster, right? Like
Hmm.
it's kind of like, what is it in team topologies when you have the group of people that are kind of the experts and the, oh man, I can see the book on my shelf. Anyway, like they're like the consultants, they're the
Hmm.
experts there. They're just going to make you go faster. But what inevitably happened is the DBA just became a bottleneck, right? Like,
Hmm.
and I'm kind of aging myself out here because I think the idea of DBA is going away. That's probably for another conversation. But in any event, I feel like, that's kind of happened with ops and DevOps, where this idea of like, we're here to provide platforms and tooling, and we're going to abstract all this stuff away from you so that you, a developer, you can go, flat out, right? You're in your flow state and you're just shipping code. But I think more often than not, what happens is that the DevOps and ops organizations often become a bottleneck.
Yeah, yeah. Which is ironic because they were meant to take away that bottleneck.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, and I feel for the folks that work in these arenas because, as I see, more and more companies moving to the cloud and more companies being in multiple clouds, like their
Mhm.
jobs have gotten really complicated. Um, and the cloud providers do provide a lot of stuff out of the box, but if you look at most DevOps people and the skills that they have to use on any given day, particularly for like multi-cloud organizations, like it's a long list of things that they have to know.
Yeah,
And the context switching between, this tool at this cloud provider, this tool at this cloud provider, it's I can appreciate how that can, it's a lot of toil.
yeah. It's like a bigger operational burden on the operators, basically.
Yes.
Whereas, like,
Yeah.
the devs are like still sitting pretty, doing their thing.
Yeah.
I was actually
Yeah.
having a discussion earlier with someone where like I was saying how for me like I find it funny that like I started like in a development background, and then for me like I made it my business to like learn how to package containerized applications and deploy them
Right.
and know how to like, deploy cloud infrastructure, IAC, all that stuff. But for me, it was a bit of like, bit mind boggling to realize that that is not a thing that most developers concern themselves with,
Yeah.
kind of by design. And I thought that was
Yeah.
kind of funny because I'm like, I don't know, I like this stuff. I want to know how everything works end to end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's you know for both the ops DevOps orgs and the developer orgs, like the one thing that I'm becoming more and more convinced about is just this idea of standards. And
Hmm.
you and I were talking earlier, and I mentioned that, the fact that I'm on the National Ski Patrol, and I
Hmm.
think that
Hmm.
there's some really amazing things that the Ski Patrol has kind of figured out about how they train and train patrollers, and how patrollers operate and deal with emergencies. And I think about this a lot when I think about, DevOps and developers and kind of the struggle that often exists. The thing that the Ski Patrol does really well is it has some very, very highly prescribed tools and processes.
Yep.
Like the types of splints that we use and how you apply the sprint is very prescribed, to the point that, and I've actually done this before. I was not patrolling, but I came upon a car accident, and somebody else who was an EMT was there,
Hmm.
and we were able to essentially, stabilize this person and get them to be handed off to an ambulance.
Yeah.
And what was interesting is that, like, at the end of like dealing with the acute emergency, like when the ambulance left, this guy came, we kind of shook each other's hands, like, man, I'm so glad we're both here.
Yeah.
And we were kind of laughing because as we were moving the patient around and putting them on the backboard and applying a C collar for neck mobilization, we never said a word to each other. We had been trained on the tool,
Right.
like the backboard, the spider straps, and the C collar, and we knew the process. Like we knew which straps to apply first, right? You
Right.
go
And you didn't
around the
know each
chest
other.
first. Never knew each other. Never, nothing. And so, like, what I've been preaching a lot at, where I am right now is I've been thinking about this stuff with the National Ski Patrol, and to me, like, that's a beautiful example of why, standards and conventions really do help
Yes.
everybody, right? Like
Absolutely.
if we were to say, for any low latency OLTP concerns, we're going to use Postgres.
Hmm.
Like, if you think about the ripple effects that has on reduction of cognitive load, it becomes really quite interesting. Like, think about disaster recovery, right? Like, your database choice informs your ability to recover quickly in the event of a disaster in a
Yes.
significant way, right?
Yeah.
The reason why I came upon that accident and jumped out of my car and was able to help that person, not to say that we saved their lives, but we probably made them more comfortable
Yeah.
and got them, to the next level of care. Like, we were able to do that so efficiently.
Yeah.
Like, there was no cognitive load. Like, this person and I were focusing on solving the problem of this person who had been in a bad accident.
Right.
And when I think about, to me, it's like, okay, that's interesting. It's a really interesting organizational problem. Why was that beneficial? Oh, the standard tool and the standard process removed all cognitive load. What if we did that at work? What if we said, hey,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
what? Let's just standardize. Like, yes, I mean, we can argue about MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle, like, we can argue about it. But like,
Yeah.
if we pick a tool, then the unintended but kind of intended consequences become material. Like, all of a sudden, like, we have one backup tooling,
Yeah.
we have one recovery tooling. If I get paged in the middle of the night and it's because, my coworker's out and I have to jump into a Sev one, I know how to back up restore Postgres, right? Like, if it were
Yeah.
Cassandra or something else, it'd be like, I have no idea. Like, so anyway,
Yeah.
um I'm obviously pretty passionate about this.
I love this so much. I have like so many like follow-ups to this.
Yeah,
Because it reminds me because at the previous and we know each other from a previous organization where we worked together, and I do recall that at this previous organization it was more of a like, you work with the technologies that you're most comfortable with sort of
yeah,
approach to things, which I think can be very interesting and effective until it stops being effective. I think especially if you're starting to like grow the organization to a significant size.
yeah,
And I definitely learned both there and at a previous organization that being able to standardize and to standardize by codifying things like really went a long way, because
yeah,
to a certain extent we got to save people from themselves.
yeah. So
But
so
yeah.
the codifying things. Here's another great example in the ski patrol. Um, and it is interesting, this idea, just to kind of zoom out a little bit. This idea of like the developer experience and developer creativity. Like we want small autonomous teams because our hypothesis is that collectively they will deliver more value.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
we talk about things like full service ownership. You build it, you run it. These are wonderful ideas, but at the end of the day, it's the software organization isn't there to satisfy all their curiosity. Like most
Hmm.
most places, they're there to because they have a mission, a purpose, a goal, and oftentimes it is to make money.
Yeah.
Um, so what one of the things that another thing we do on the ski patrol, which I love this idea, and this kind of goes back to this idea of like standards, like
Hmm.
creating an environment where you still have autonomy and creativity to solve problems. Like we
Hmm.
all know that there's a lot of creativity in software engineering,
Yeah.
even though at the end of the day it's just a set of instructions. I think there's a way to allow for both, but I do think that I think that it's important for software developers and DevOps people, all of us, right, to understand that the things that we might be locally optimizing for are not part of the global optimization, right? Like my desire to introduce Rust into a service because I think it is better and it could possibly be better for that service. It's not in service of the larger goals. So
Right.
on the ski patrol, if I'm on scene with somebody who's been badly injured and they have to be, taken down the mountain, they're not able to ski or snowboard anymore. We put them in a sled, a toboggan. Whenever a toboggan arrives with another patroller, there's something called a sled pack, and the sled pack has like the tools that you need to probably address the person that's injured who has to be put into a toboggan and sent away. So we have some blankets, some splints, some devices to move people around, things like that. Every time the toboggan arrives, when I open up the sled pack, everything is there and it's always in the right order.
That's awesome.
And it's to me, it's like it's another fabulous and so I'm sure that if I went to any other mountain in the U.S. and if I was a bystander and somebody said,
Hmm.
"Hey, can you help?" I'd be like, "Yeah, I'm a member of the SB, blah blah blah." If the toboggan arrives and I go to open up the sled pack, I guarantee you it'll be all those things in
Yeah.
that order.
Yeah.
And like when I was getting trained, sorry, that was my cat.
All right.
when I when I
Welcome,
was
furry
getting when I
friends.
was when I was getting trained on the ski patrol, like it never thought to like offer a different solution or like to suggest something different or to sneak in a different thing.
Hmm.
Because I think part of the training is like, the whole idea here is to remove the cognitive load so that when
Right.
you're in a crisis, you can focus on solving the problem, which is making sure the person can breathe, they're not bleeding to death, and that anything is not straight gets straightened. And so for me, when I think about this at work, it's things like, all right, if I'm going to go look at a microservice, and we've all agreed that it's where you're going to use Python and Fast API or Go Engine, right? Like
Hmm.
every repo I go to, I want it to be the sled pack experience.
Yeah.
I want to clone the repo, and I want to open up the top level folder, and I want to see all the elements that are there, right? And they should be immediately recognizable. And it's interesting. Like if you talk about these ideas with some developers, they're kind of like, well, like that seems overly prescriptive. Like, why would you want to do that? That might not always work. Valid arguments, but I'm always like, well, what's the benefit of having it different every time?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I go back to this idea also of that, that code is read, I think like 100 times more than it's written. Like
Mm-hmm.
the time human beings spend with code, it's
Yeah.
mostly reading it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So why not make it easier for the next person? Like agree on a standard. We'll use Postgres. Agree on a convention. These are folder structures for our microservices. Like to me, that creates that slug pack experience. Like I'm on scene, this person's really hurt. I've got to get them to, a next level of care immediately. I don't
Yeah.
want to think about like opening up the slug pack and being like, where's the litter? Like I don't see, why isn't this splint here? Oh, because Doug decided that there was a better way,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he liked that idea
Like that
better. um, and having said all this, though, the one
better.
thing I will say is that going back to some of my other stories, is I'm old school. Like my first job at a school, like there was never a conversation about languages or naming conventions. Like it was all written down. It's General
Yeah.
Electric. Like they're
Yeah.
very, thorough company. And so um anyway, so I tend to find some comfort in thinking about things like we have a language, we have a storage technology, we've got this mechanism for asynchronous communication. Just use it.
Yeah. It's interesting because like this is basically like a platform engineering problem when you look at it, right? That because I mean you are looking to standardize across the board the
Yeah.
not just the development experience, but like the overall like standardization of your
Yeah.
infrastructure and all that. And yeah, and it's very cool. Like and I think it's so great to have to be able to standardize on that, but also give some wiggle room for creativity, but not so much that like you end up sort of ruining the flow, because I think
Right.
that's really the thing. But I think then the other what helps make it effective, and I'm sure like especially like when you're doing ski patrol, like you have like a guide, right? That like you have this documented somewhere, like how these things
Mhm.
work. And I think that's where a lot of companies kind of miss the mark, is because these procedures, these standards aren't necessarily documented or well documented.
Yes. Yes. So here's the other thing that well, another thing that I love, I really appreciate about the ski patrol, National Ski Patrol, and something I really do want to bring into the to where I work. So, um, uh, getting certified to be a ski patroller involves typically two things. One is about 6 or 9 months of classroom training,
Hmm.
where you effectively become an EMT, but it's called an OEC. It's outdoor emergency care. So you're trained on outdoor emergencies. So it's kind of the basics, right? Like I think of it
Hmm.
like computer science, like or
Yeah. Yeah.
computer information systems, whatever.
Yeah.
So you finish that up. You're like, okay, I've got a whole bunch of academic knowledge. Then each mountain will do what they call on the hill. So there's another, couple of months of training where you are now taking your, kind of your academic experience and actually applying it. For us, it would be a cold weather environment. So like we have, classrooms like on the slopes, and like we practice things like out in the cold, in the snow. And so the on the hill training is really important. And once you finish the on the hill training, like you're very proficient. Like it's not like you're a noob. Like as a matter of fact, most people who come off of their when they just get their certification of patrol, you almost want to go to those people because they remember things that you don't, or I didn't
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, so like to me, like this idea of on the hill like seems really important. And I almost envision like, I don't know, like every 6 months or maybe every quarter, we take our new developers, our new engineers across all the departments, and we
Mhm.
basically run them through on the hill. So like this is our software development lifecycle, right?
Hmm.
This is our documentation, right? We're going to give you some sample code, like some scenarios to run. Like
Yeah.
join us for a Sev 1 so that basically after, I don't know, some number of weeks, let's say, those people are very familiar with how that organization works. How does it ship code?
Yeah.
Right? So like a very focused, very well thought out, thorough training program. Like
Yeah.
it's on the hill training. Like you've taken your academic experiences or whatever you had before, and we're going to show you how we do them here at our mountain with our specific protocols.
Yep.
And then when you're done with this, the entire patrol knows that you're ready and you can go and you can work accidents and you will be trusted and you will be successful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the other thing that's related to this too is that another thing that I really appreciate about the NSP is that we have refreshers. Um, so every year we get refreshed and we get retrained and retested and recertified on essentially a third of all the things you have to know as a
Hmm.
ski patroller. So we go through cycles A, B, and C every 3 years. But the great thing about it is that, and this is something else I would want to do. So like I would run cohorts of engineers through a refresher
Yeah.
just to say to people like, okay, we know you know it, but let's to be sure, like let's go back through and talk about our SDLC. Like let's have some people join some Sev ones. Like let's understand like what it's really like to work here and just recertify everybody, on the process to give people an opportunity to know that they can participate in the process so that we know that we're doing a good job and like training people and making them be successful. So I really like this idea of this refresher that happens every year in the ski patrol where you go and you spend some time RTFMing. Like we all have
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
same big medical manual that we read. We go and we meet people. It's usually in the fall, but like we'll go to the resort and we'll do some dry runs of like
Yeah.
a lift evacuation. So like
Yeah.
we'll load people up on the lift and we'll evacuate them. So it's almost like, hey, let's pretend to have a Sev one or a tabletop Sev one.
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
would be part of the refresher. Like so and so database clusters down. What are you going to do? Right?
Yeah.
Just and give people some time to kind of step back and lean back into whatever the company is doing and how it works, so that people aren't like under duress.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it makes a lot of sense because I mean, in many organizations, especially like the really large ones, you already like do things like DR testing, which in my experience, like it's a very important thing to do. But I will say that like we did it twice a year, I think, at one of the organizations where I was at, and everyone's sort of like rolling their eyes, like, oh, why do I have to do this thing? Oh, why am I the
Yeah.
unlucky one, like who's pulled into helping out with the DR tests? Um, so I think finding a way to it almost like in some ways felt like we were going through the motions, which
Yeah.
kind of defeats the whole purpose of the whole thing. But then there's the other side of it too, like when oftentimes when new engineers are onboarded onto a company or even onto a different team, um, unfortunately they're kind of just thrust in, right? It's like, oh, here, read some stuff, and then we
Yeah.
expect you to be productive in a week. Good luck to you.
Yeah.
That's the type of culture that we need to aim to change, because it can be very frustrating if you're new to an organization, and especially, oh my god, imagine you're fresh out of school. Like if you've done this enough times in your career, like, oh, whatever, I guess that's just the way
Yeah.
it is. But like to the
Yeah.
poor kid fresh out of school, they're like, what's going on?
Yeah. It's yeah, like it's curious to me because you'd think that the company, the business, the organization would intuit the value of knowing how to recover during a disaster.
Hmm.
And in my experience, like I want to say there's only a handful of places that I think really understood that and made the investment in the training and the technology to be ready.
Yeah, where like more than just going through the motions, more than just like this is a compliance thing where we need to tick off
Yeah.
this item, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the companies that like care about like doing chaos engineering tests and game days and that sort of thing, I think
Yeah.
those are those are the organizations where you're probably going to see, success in terms of like, low panic factor, perhaps during
Yeah.
incident responses, right? Yeah.
Well, it's I kind of going back to one of our threads from earlier, like this
Mhm.
idea of like, you know, ski patrol. We use one splint to deal with femur fractures,
Yeah.
a Sager splint. There's other splints,
Yeah.
but like that's what we use. Going back to this idea of like, choose a database for all of your low latency OLTP concerns,
Yeah.
maybe even HTAP concerns, hybrid transactional analytical processing concerns. But in any event, pick a
Yeah.
database.
Yeah.
Like the, not only does it have this interesting effect on reducing cognitive load, but when you start to think about the idea of like chaos engineering, like if you're in an environment where you're storing data in, I don't know, Kafka, Cassandra, Mongo, some relational database, another relational database, right? Like chaos engineering starts to become incredibly daunting, almost impractical or impossible. Not impossible, but like impractical. The, going, again, like when I think about the ski patrol, it's like there's lots of different splints.
Mhm.
Everyone knows this one, and we are all trained on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can put it on and off with, blindfolded, because it's in service of a larger goal, which is, to help people and
Yeah.
prevent the, and hopefully, save their lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you think about like uh, this idea of like really trying to be keeping your technology stack simple,
Yeah.
and having standards
Yep.
and really really adhere to them, like the unintended consequences of that start to bleed into all these other concerns: retention, recruiting,
Yeah.
hiring.
So
um
true.
I love this idea of like, where I am at Uplight right now, like we have a
Mhm.
lot of Python experience, we have a lot of fast API experience. It would be
Mhm.
easy for me to turn to another team and say, can you help for like 2 weeks, one
Yeah.
sprint? And most of the people around me would be like, yep, I can do it. they
Yeah.
they know they know the language, they know the process, they know the framework. And I wish I wish more organizations saw that benefit. And I wish more businesses would like lean into and lean into engineering to say like, you know, we're running a business, we have a mission. Like we understand that you have this creative thing that you do. We don't know what it
Yeah.
is, but you build stuff for us. Like keep it simple,
Yeah. 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 And so
because
much.
we have these larger goals that we need to meet, and part of it is hiring people, recruiting people, having agility within the our software teams. We want to have small autonomous teams that come together, build a solution, and then they dissolve like over and
Yeah.
over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the way to do that is by having like, having those standards, picking good tools, using them until they can't serve you anymore, which, for the most part is never the case. Like to me, like that is a real interesting recipe. Like taking those concepts from the ski
Yeah.
patrol, I just want to inject them into software organizations.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes so much sense to me because then when you strip everything down, you're left with, I get to solve cool problem.
Yep.
And the other thing too is like you can apply that, to another aspect that kind of is like the bane of every developer's existence, which is like compliance and security, right? Having that standardization, working together with our friends in security, which doesn't
Yeah.
always happen, but like if you have the standardization in place, codifying the standardization, then
Yeah.
again you're taking away the mystery and make it easy to implement those the security policies
Yeah.
is the other thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's so I'm, again, being the older programmer in the room, and admittedly a bit of a curmudgeon. Like to me, just the simple technology stacks always win,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and they win because they help. the people and process. People, process, and technology. The simple technology stacks make those other things come into focus and be
Yeah.
successful. And I see it over and over and over in my career. The simple solutions, the simple technology solutions always win.
And it's funny too, because like, as developers, we are drawn to like shiny new objects, and sometimes
Yeah.
the shiny things can be overly complicated. Like, it even reminds me one time, like at a previous job, like I was on a release engineering team, and we were using Azure for our cloud, and we were looking at possibly moving to like Kubernetes, but we were using before like Azure Container Services to manage like all our microservices, and quite frankly, it was doing a very good job. And yet they were like looking at moving to Kubernetes because, well, Kubernetes, come
Right.
on.
Of course.
But it was funny because in the end, they made the decision of like, yeah, this thing's too complicated. Like, the thing is, Azure Container Services is doing the job. Shit's not breaking.
Yeah.
We are happy. So why are we overly complicating the situation, right? Which I think was a very, for me, like liking Kubernetes, I was like sad, but like when you look at it very objectively, it made a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny to like when I hear these stories about, people, using some very, very sophisticated, complicated, things like Kubernetes and struggle with it. And I'm like, I have to remind myself, like, okay, we've shipped code before, right?
Yep. Yep.
Like without all this stuff, like I'm pretty sure I remember shipping code to a computer. So there's a way, but I feel like we've strayed from the path. Like, how do we get back onto the path of like, let's ship hello world
Yeah. Yeah.
and keep it simple.
Yeah, and I think that is the key, right? Keeping it simple, because we like to overcomplicate for the sake of
Yeah.
like, because we want to solve a cool problem. I think at the end of the
Yeah.
day, we're engineers, we want to solve really cool problems. So let's find a complex way to do it. But and then
Yeah.
you like see the simple solution, you're like, oh yeah, I guess that would have been better.
I think that's an interesting way that you've described that. Like it's kind of like we have to go against our own nature. Like
Yeah,
most of us got into this because we're geeks, we're nerding out, and like we're learning new stuff, right, all the time.
yeah,
But it's almost like now you have to like step into this like work environment and say like I'm gonna have to deny my true nature
yeah,
here,
yeah,
and I'm just gonna to a certain degree, like, not assume that everything's a nail and you have a hammer, but like you almost want to say like, okay, I've got four tools in this little toolbox. I've got to keep it simple. I need to focus on the larger goal here. What is our goal? We need software to solve this problem. Great. I've got these tools. I'll keep it simple.
yeah,
But
yeah,
for so many of us, it's like, but that's not why I'm here.
yeah.
I got here because of my ability to pick up new things and be curious and dig and learn.
Yeah, and so you're like creating a new challenge for yourself so that you can
Yeah.
kind of keep the brain active.
Yeah.
It actually reminds
Developer
me
catnap.
of, sorry?
Have you heard that before? Developer catnap.
No, I have
Like,
not.
I heard that from somebody I worked with about a year ago. I hadn't heard it before, but I thought it was just a great expression. This idea of developer catnap. Like we see something and we smell something and then we're all into it. It's like, no, 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 no. Go back over here.
So true, so true. It actually reminds me of something I experienced fairly early in my career, where we were doing like we were writing code to like convert some stuff and pop it into like an Oracle database. And the vendor we were using, they had a Java API for it, and I was like super excited. Like Java was still new. This was like early 2000s. I'm like, oh, this is awesome, great problem to solve. And then we're running some performance tests, and the Java code was slow as fuck. Like it was ridiculous. But they also had like a PL SQL API. And so we started, doing like some tests running the same kind of code in PL SQL. And I
Yeah.
mean, it runs in the database. Of course, it's going to be faster, like Java,
Right.
big, like,
Yeah.
extra overhead bloat. And I remember being so sad. I was like, I have to learn this crappy language. I'm going to be like, I'm not
Yeah.
going to have like up to date skills. But like, objectively thinking back, like it had to be that solution. Otherwise,
Yeah.
like the PLSQL code was so much more performant than the Java code. And I had to put my pride aside and suck it up because that was the better solution. It was the more logical solution.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sitting here thinking like there's definitely cohorts of developers who have had a schema handed to them in an ORM and might not have ever really written SQL.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I feel like SQL was like my life for the first chunk of my career.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I
Me
don't know if
too.
I can write the complex SQL that I used to back in the day, but it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we are coming up on time, but before we go, I was wondering if you have any final like parting words that you would like to share with our audience.
I, you know, I would be curious to hear from other people, like if they have experience where they've, you know, either as a hobby or a volunteer or a second job, like I would love to hear other people like if how they could take something that they're doing, like the National Ski Patrol and software engineering, like what in the world do they have in common? And I think the answer is quite a bit. And I think
Hmm.
that the software engineering world could learn a lot from the ski patrol. So I would like, I guess my parting thought would be like very curious to hear from other people. Like, do you have a former job or some experience where it just seems orthogonal to what we do, but actually could help?
Yeah, so true, so true. And I've talked to a bunch of people about that. Like even someone they were in incident response,
Oh,
and
wow.
but
Okay. Yeah.
they used to be in the service industry, like work at restaurants. And she was telling me how like she had to learn to like manage customers and stuff, like deal with them and have unpleasant conversations and
Yeah.
how so many parallels between that
Yeah.
and what she did in incident response. And I'm like, after we finished recording the podcast, I'm like, you have to write a blog post about this, which she did.
Yeah. Oh,
But yeah, I
cool.
mean, it's great that we like let's draw more on our real life
Yeah.
experiences and find parallels in the software world because it's so relevant.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think if, if we can be, humble and not just assume that because we're the nerds that we know the answer,
Yes,
that could help.
absolutely. Yeah, this was really great. I'm so glad that you brought this topic up because I think it's so relevant. It's very eye opening and kind of sobering in a way. Like it's let's take a step back and evaluate like what are we doing here.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the beginning of the adventure.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Doug, for geeking
Yeah.
out with me today. Y'all don't forget to subscribe and be sure to check out the show notes for additional resources and to connect with us and our guests on social media. Until next time.
Peace out and geek out.
Geeking Out is hosted and produced by me, Adriana Vilela. I also compose and perform the theme music on my trusty clarinet. Geeking Out is also produced by my daughter, Hannah Maxwell, who incidentally designed all of the cool graphics. Be sure to follow us on all the socials by going to bento.me/geekingout.